A few years back, Riot made a controversial decision to allow lane-based assassin champions like Zed, Talon, and Qiyana to be played in the jungle as part of the initiative to allow more champions to be played there. The change was viewed in mostly a negative light, with players arguing against giving such high mobility, high burst champions the freedom to perma-roam throughout the game and not have to deal with possibly the only thing that could shut them down before they snowball out of control, a lane opponent. Between then and now, Riot has continued to make efforts to allow more champions to flex into jungle. Last year, around the same time, we ran into the literal overnight success of jungle Darius, making him by far the strongest jungler in the game and giving him the highest pick rate, win rate, and ban rate he's ever had in over a decade. Just recently though, even more champions were added to the jungle roster: Aatrox, Riven, Fizz, Jace, Malphite, and Ambessa, and over the years they saw fit to include Sylas, Gwen, Diana, Mundo, Brand, Zyra, and many more. A byproduct of this, however, was the growing frequency of champions running into scenarios where they dominate the metagame seemingly out of nowhere, and today jungle has now overtaken top lane as the role with the highest champion class diversity in League. Why does it feel like Riot is trying to shove every single champion into the jungle? That'll be our discussion for today. I want to talk about the increasing number of flex picks in the game and what are some potential downsides to lending such versatility to too many champions. Flex picking has always been a thing in League even way back in the day, despite each role having their own obligations demanding certain strengths and traits within those who set foot in them. Some champions, whether by coincidence or design, can play in multiple roles. It's commonplace for a number of mid lane mages, for instance, to also moonlight as supports, Lux being a prime example. No doubt you're also privy to the countless incidents over the years concerning AD carries being their own mid lane, such as Lucian, Tristana, Zeri, and Smolder. But if there's one role that's been getting the most attention in this regard, it would be the jungle, which has not only been witnessing the highest number of flex picks, but also the highest number of deliberate actions taken to make the champion work in the jungle. Across every patch, you're bound to see some balance changes involving a champion's ability to deal increased damage to monsters. For example, at the time of writing this, we're in 16.4, and Ambessa, Brand, Darius, Fizz, Maokai, and Teemo were all buffed or nerfed based on their capabilities in the jungle. From a design standpoint, at least ostensibly, the easiest way to make a champion a jungler is to give them a competitive clear speed. Way back in the day, a multitude of factors determined whether or not a champion could jungle, but with monster camps becoming way less of a threat in the early game, among other things, the physical barrier to entry for being a jungler has been rendered down to not if you can jungle, but how fast you can jungle. The faster you clear camps, the faster your rate of gold and XP accumulation is, and likewise the faster your tempo is, which is the end-all be-all of a jungler, how fast you can get from one place to another. Theoretically, it could very well be possible for a Thresh to become a jungler if hypothetically they made it so Flay did triple damage against monsters. That would honestly be pretty insane and kind of cool, but I digress. First, we'll address the rise of junglers before getting into the overall topic of flex picks. Why has Riot been trying to force champions into the jungle? Here's the short answer: no one wants to play jungle. It's no secret that despite being the most dominant role in the game by impact and influence, a statement Riot themselves have admitted to, it's also the role most likely to feature autofills. I've talked extensively on why that's the case. If you like a more detailed explanation on that, you can check out my other videos on the jungle role, but to briefly summarize, the two biggest reasons why jungle is the least popular role in the game are 1. Because it's the most impactful role in the game, and 2. Because of how nuanced it is, thereby making it unclear what the most optimal win condition a jungler should take is. Contradictory as it may sound given the sheer volume of players with anime main character syndrome, with all the sentiment surrounding jungle's influence being as prevalent as it is, while you are able to take credit for winning most of the games you win, you're also just as liable for taking the blame for all the games you lose. The jungle role is the most scapegoated role in the game for that very reason, discouraging players from wanting to play it so as to avoid the mental pressure that comes with it. Furthermore, jungle is also the most complex role in the game on account of how many things you can do and are expected to do. You can apply pressure by ganking every single lane over and over and getting your team ahead that way. You could apply pressure by stocking up on objectives like Dragon, Void Grub, Surf Tailed, and so on. Or you can apply pressure by capitalizing on the lack of constant confrontation that a lane opponent would impose on you and safely farm to scale into a late game power spike. Ideally, you should aim to accomplish all three. The challenge here is that learning a new role or simply getting through one autofill game can be onerous in and of itself, much less having to do so on a champion you've only maybe played once or twice on ARAM. It's comparatively easier to first time a champion top, mid, or ADC due to the circumstances being identical regardless of who you play. Sure, you could be more aggressive when playing Draven as opposed to Twitch, but if your support catches out the enemy ADC in a bad spot, doesn't matter who you're playing, your job is all the same. Not so the case for jungle. Every champion has their own minutiae of things they have to work towards, and then the jungle role itself has a bunch of things you have to work towards, compounding the role's difficulty curve. They may not be able to reduce the complexity of the jungle role, but they can at least give you the weapons you're used to wielding, ergo granting dozens of champions the capability of playing in the jungle to a somewhat competent degree. You might not be that good of a jungler, but if say you're a Riven one-trick, at least you know how to play your champion, which is better than nothing. That being said, simply increasing a champion's clear speed would not have been sufficient at qualifying them to be a jungler. You needed a very specific set of abilities to be able to navigate your way through it. First, you needed some form of healing or sustain. Neutral monsters back in the day were extremely difficult to clear since on top of their very high HP bar and your champion's low DPS in the early game, they also just did a lot of damage to you. At the risk of sounding like a boomer, back in my day, you never had to worry about getting 3-camp ganked immediately because the enemy jungler had to recall to heal back up most of the time. Second, you needed mana sustain. Most junglers will blow through their entire mana pool to clear camps unless they have blue buff. Nowadays, even without blue buff, you have a bottomless supply of mana. Third, you needed gank pressure, aka gap closes or lockdown. But with the inclusion of plants like Blast Cone giving champions more ways to traverse terrain, as well as the game itself becoming less based on jungler rotates to lane and more lane rotates to jungle, so many champions can now become junglers. Jungle pets give single target champions AoE damage, they give ability spamming champions mana sustain even without blue buff, and they make it so even junglers without healing or shielding can finish a full clear at full HP without needing a single health potion, whereas half a decade ago everyone had to buy Hunter's Elixir to stay healthy. Good clear speed is helpful, but the surrounding infrastructure played a bigger role in making the jungle more accessible. More importantly, the choice of who gets to flex into jungle is also fairly intentional. If you're wondering why they opted for Qiyana, Talon, Ambessa, Jace, Riven, etc., it's because those champions have some of the highest playmaking potential in the game. In other words, they have the most agency. The secondary choice would be champions who are either known to be exclusively one-tricked or the inverse. They're highly prevalent in their home role. The only people who play Teemo in League of Legends are those who play Teemo and only Teemo. Better to have a Teemo one-trick play Teemo jungle than for them to first time someone else, right? Conversely, Aatrox and Darius are two of the most popular top laners in the game, and so by allowing them to be junglers, if and when a top laner gets autofilled, they're more likely than not to at least know how to play one of those two champions. It also presents a contingency against counterpicks in champ select. Top laners across the board harbor a general dislike for being blue side as a result of the pick order in champ select, effectively forcing the blue side top to blind pick in a role notoriously decided by champion matchups 90% of the time. Most new additions to the jungle consist of top laners: Aatrox, Ornn, Darius, Nasus, Gwen, Jace, Malphite, Ambessa, Riven, Mundo, Jax, Teemo, Wukong, and Zahen. By contrast, it's more safe to blind pick the jungler for either team by virtue of said jungler not having to directly interact with the enemy jungler on a constant basis, which can add some semblance of mix-up potential by tricking the enemy team into thinking it's a Darius top when in reality it's Darius jungle, for example. This applies to all jungle flex picks, by the way. If you see a Talon, Brand, Diana, Sylas, Qiyana, Fizz, Echo, you as the enemy team have to be prepared for the possibility of them being either the mid laner or the jungle. At a surface glance, that appears to be a good thing, right? More champions being made junglers lowers the chance of someone first timing a champion they've never played, and it also allows the solo laners to be less likely to get counterpicked by making it more nebulous on whether Fizz is going mid or jungle. That may be true, but here are some downsides to allowing such flexibility. Just as there are champions who were conceived and balanced around being junglers and only junglers, there are champions who originally never accounted for the possibility of being in the jungle suddenly becoming junglers. Throughout the now 12 years I spent playing this game, the majority of incidents surrounding an overpowered champion running amok were often related to them being played in a role they were not meant to be played in. Again, take last year for example, Jungle Darius. To call this a lightning bolt on a clear day would be a complete understatement. Darius was strong and a consistent top laner, not weak by any means, but not overpowered either. Jungle Darius, however, presented the perfect storm of circumstances to create arguably the strongest jungler in Season 15. Strong as he was, in top lane Darius can get hard countered just like any other top laner. Such counterpicks are a crucial factor in preventing him from steamrolling the entire game. However, like I mentioned earlier, in the jungle, even though some champions might excel at fighting him like Kha'Zix or Kindred, that's if they have the opportunity to fight him. Junglers are not required to engage in direct confrontation with the other jungler every waking moment of a match. Consequently, Darius gets the free farm and reaches mid to late game power spike without much worry. The other concern is tempo. Darius may have a pull, but taking 5 minutes to saunter over to you doesn't make him much of a threat, like ever. Well, it just so happens Gust Walker's gain in tandem with Ghostblade, Deadman's, and Swifties affords Darius perma 500 movement speed to make him basically an infinitely better Udyr. Suddenly, both of his most critical weaknesses, matchup and mobility, or lack thereof, which mind you were intentionally accounted for by Riot to stop him from spiraling out of control, were completely negated, explaining why he became an overnight sensation because yeah, giving no lane opponent and tons of movement speed kinda does that to a Juggernaut. By allowing champions to flex into jungle or any role for that matter, it creates opportunities for them to break free of any constraints that might otherwise have been keeping them in check and dominate the metagame. Zeri and Smolder both had ridiculously high win rates in top and mid lane despite being marksmen because they were designed around fighting a 2v2 lane with slower EXP accumulation than a solo lane. Lee Sin had a brief stint in top lane a couple years back that made him a really stupid lane bully because he could stat check you with his high base damage while using the shield from Safeguard and lifesteal from Iron Will to endlessly sustain off minions. The reason Lee Sin has so much base damage is to give him good early game clear speed, and the sustain from bolt W's was to account for jungle camps doing a lot of damage to him way back in the day. The more roles the champion can flex into, the more they can circumvent environmental factors meant to serve as limiters to their pressure. For example, Nasus, or any infinite scaler for that matter, cannot be allowed to be a jungler. I thought we learned that lesson from the Feral Flare meta. I had 2 games with Nasus jungle, and both times he was at like 500 stacks by 10 minutes. Even with perfect CS, you can never get that kind of stacks in lane. For that matter, it's much more difficult to bully Nasus out of CS in jungle than top lane, letting him freeform to his power spike with little to no resistance. It would be one thing if the champion came into the game already meant to be flexed into multiple roles, such as Irelia, Echo, and Lux, whose abilities were clearly implemented for those scenarios. But taking a champion that was originally meant for just one role and artificially forcing them into another role carries tremendous risk in turning them into sudden balance nightmares, as you now have to balance them around an entirely new climate. The second problem ties back to the notion of pick safety, because that can either be a good or bad thing. On one hand, allowing a champion to flex into multiple roles affords a modicum of protection against getting directly counterpicked if the opponent incorrectly assumes what role that champion is playing in. On the other hand, I forget exactly who said it, but I recall a streamer talking about how there's nothing wrong with champions being able to go into flex roles, but after all 10 champions are picked, they should be allowed to know which champions are going where. It can be really frustrating staring down an enemy champ select consisting of Irelia, Sylas, and Jace, because all 3 of them can go top, jungle, or mid and you have no indication of which one you're fighting, making it difficult for you to know what set of runes and summoners you should be taking until you're already in game and it's too late. It can also give rise to more matchup fatigue. 10 or so years ago, you only had to be mindful of maybe half a dozen to a dozen matchups. Now, in every single role, you have to account for 30 plus champions you could potentially go up against. What's the top laner supposed to do when they see Rek'Sai top for the first time? How do they learn to play around that? Rek'Sai's historically been a jungler. How much should the enemy team be concerned about a jungle Riven? Is she really good at ganking or not really? I haven't talked about bot lane all that much, but dude, there's like a new kill support appearing every other week down there. We had Camille support, Elise support, Nidalee support, LeBlanc support, Zoe support's a thing now. Like every single lane, you have to be ready to fight anyone. So while yes, flexibility grants you the benefit of playing a familiar champion in an unfamiliar environment, that very flexibility can create unfamiliar situations, effectively cancelling out the benefits. To clarify, I'm not against allowing champions to play in more than one role, but when done to such an excessive degree, it needlessly creates more complexity not just for the players but for the balanced team itself. It's much easier to balance a champion if they can only play into one role, but now you have to balance them for top, jungle, mid, ADC, and support, creating its own kind of solo queue jail quote-unquote. You know how some champions are never allowed to be strong or else they get abused in pro play? A similar thing can happen here where a champion is kept permanently weak in one role because if you buff them in one role, you run the risk of them being overpowered in another role. I appreciate that they're making the jungle accessible for more players. At the same time, perhaps they should, reflect on the Pyke mid, Lee Sin top, Lucian mid, Darius jungle, Janna top situations and take a hint that maybe we shouldn't let everyone go everywhere. What do you guys think though? Do you agree with my thoughts on flex picks? Or do you believe this has more benefits than detriments? Let me know in the comments down below. That'll be all for today, so if you enjoyed the video, I would appreciate it if you'd like to like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other discussion videos if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.